Hey everyone, tonight we're going to explore something a bit darker. A time full of disease, harsh punishments, and simple, often unpleasant meals. We're going to uncover what life was really like during the Middle Ages. Forget about the glamorous castles and heroic knights Hollywood likes to portray. The truth is, you'd probably barely last a day. So, before we get started, make sure to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is on your end. It's always interesting to see how far-reaching this little journey goes. Now, let's dim the lights. Maybe put on a fan to add a soft hum to the background, and get ready to dive into tonight's adventure together. Congrats. You've just awoken in the year 1325. The good news? You're still alive. The bad news? The fleas are too. Your bed is a half-rotten straw mattress filled with bugs and hay. That's got the delightful aroma of a barn floor, because, well, it used to be a barn floor 3 months ago. There's no foam, no fluffy pillows, and definitely no luxurious sheets. Just a wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter. Now weighed down by dirt and grime, you blink, still groggy, as the distant sound of a church bell rings out, the medieval equivalent of an alarm clock, only louder and, somehow, more unforgiving. Your home? A wooden hut with one room, no windows, and a wonderfully open design where your family, livestock, and all sorts of pests share the same space. The air? Oh, it's a mix of stale beer, sweat, goat, and something suspicious you pray isn't mold but likely is. Scented candles? Not a thing, and even if they were, they just melt onto your dirt floor. Stretching feels like a bad idea. Your joints creak and ache, and the cold air makes it worse. You're 22 years old, which back then is practically middle-aged. Your spine cracks like an old door, and your knees sound like rocks shaking in a bag. Getting out of bed? A risk. The floor's either soaked from last night's rain leaking through the thatched roof, or crusted over by whatever your neighbor's chicken left behind. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the problem. Privacy? What's that? The whole family, plus maybe a cousin who just never left, is waking up right beside you. There's no bedroom, no curtains, no me time. Just a communal space where everyone shares everything. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where solitude is a luxury and bugs, rodents, and a dozen other people keep you company. And this is just the beginning. It only gets worse. So, you've finally managed to crawl out of your straw-covered nightmare. Well done. Now nature's calling. But it's not a polite request. It's more like an emergency. You start missing modern bathrooms pretty quickly. There's no toilet, no seat, no flush, not even a plunging device in sight. In the 14th century, relieving yourself is an event, a public event. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is likely a wooden bucket behind the house, already full because Uncle Wolfstan had a rough night with some bad turnips. The stench is biblical. You hold your breath, do your business, and then here's the fun part. You toss it into the street. Yes, the street, and before you do, you're supposed to yell something like Gare de Lou, which is Old French for look out below. But honestly, no one ever moves quickly enough. The streets are open sewers, a mix of human waste, animal droppings, and liquids you'd rather not examine. If you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines. Well, lucky you, you get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in a wooden outhouse where privacy is a joke, and ventilation is practically non-existent. Conversations happen, but try not to breathe too deeply. Toilet paper? Not even close. Most people wipe with straw, leaves, old rags, or moss. If they're feeling particularly indulgent, they might use a scrap of wool. Sometimes, though, they just leave it at that, And that might explain why handshakes weren't all that common. And if you think the castle's better, think again. Maybe you've got a guardrobe, a hole in the wall that empties straight into the moat. Great idea, except your enemies know this too. Yes, attackers sometimes climb through the waste chute. Talk about an unconventional entry. So, whether you're a farmer or a noble, medieval toilet rituals are unpleasant. It's cold, public, and uncomfortable, never a clean experience. A single misstep on a wet stone path, and you could end up face first in the aftermath of humanity's leftovers. And you still haven't even brushed your teeth. But we'll tackle that next. You survived the toilet ordeal, you deserve a reward, right? Maybe a hearty breakfast, something warm and comforting to kickstart your day. Well, tough luck, in medieval Europe, comfort isn't really a thing. Breakfast is as grim as it gets. No eggs, no coffee, and definitely no avocado toast. You sit or squat by the fire, eating a bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily ration of pottage. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew made from whatever you can scrounge up: grains, root vegetables, maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, and new ingredients are just tossed on top of the old. There's no recipe, just a never-ending experiment in culinary survival. As a side dish, a hunk of bread that's as hard as a rock, made from coarse rye or barley flour, sometimes with sawdust or ground acorns mixed in. This loaf isn't your friend. You don't slice it. You struggle with it. What about drinks? No orange juice or oat milk lattes here. You're drinking beer at 8 a.m. Why? Because water is contaminated with parasites. So, you start your day with weak ale, low alcohol, high survivability. Even the kids drink it. No one likes it, but it's the best option for survival. Meat or cheese? Dream on. That's for Sundays and saints' feast days, if your lord is feeling generous. Most peasants don't get meat more than a few times a year. Fresh fruit is a rare treat and only in season, often already turned into wine. Spices? Unless you're royalty, don't even think about it. A pinch of pepper costs more than your monthly wages. Salt is so valuable. It's locked away, so you chew your gritty bread, sip your medieval beer, and try not to think about the rat nibbling your porridge last night. Breakfast doesn't energize you. It's just something you endure. Now that you're properly underfed, it's time to get to work, and trust me, your day won't be any easier. So, you finished your miserable medieval breakfast. Now it's time to get dressed. But that won't make things any better. You have exactly one outfit, a wool tunic or linen shift, which you've worn every day for months, maybe even years. There's no such thing as seasonal fashion. There's just wear it until it disintegrates or gives you a rash. Underwear? Optional. Maybe a linen undertunic if you're lucky. Otherwise, you're going commando under your layers of itchy wool, all sewn together by someone who probably had no idea what they were doing. There's no washing machine, no soap, and no dry cleaner to help. Your clothes are stained, stiff, and smell like a pigsty that's been fermenting for weeks. Even if you wanted to wash them, good luck, you'd have to carry water from a river or well, heat it over a fire, scrub your tunic with ashes, or let it sit out in the sun, which, in medieval Europe, only comes around 3 days a year. Don't even get me started on shoes, if you have any. They're made from untreated leather, barely stitched together, and provide zero arch support. Most peasants go barefoot through mud, dung, and the occasional sharp rock or disease puddle. This means your skin is constantly irritated. Fleas, lice, and bed bugs make their homes on your body. Everyone has them, nobles, monks, children, everyone's an insect farm. You'll scratch your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the priest. And no, one will bat an eye. Your skin is raw. Your scalp is a battlefield of bites. And if you develop a rash, well, too bad. There's no dermatologist, no medicine, just more suffering. If you're lucky, it won't get infected, but you'll have that rash as your unwanted medieval sidekick for the next 6 months. Now that you're dressed in misery and discomfort, it's time to face the world outside and get to work. The real work, the one that will break your back, is just beginning. Welcome to medieval Europe. There's no weekend. There's no clocking out, just sunrise to sunset. 6 days a week. Sunday is your day off unless you're harvesting, fighting off raiders, or praying desperately for your infected toe to stop turning black. The work is relentless. Fields are plowed by hand or with oxen. If you're fortunate enough to own one, you dig trenches, plant seeds, pull weeds, and fetch water until your back feels like it's twisted into an S shape. No one cares if you're exhausted. No one's checking on your mental well-being. If you're a woman, surprise, you don't just work the fields. You also tend to children, cook, clean, spin wool, feed animals, and pretend that your husband's lice problem isn't slowly making its way to your side of the bed. Children begin to help out by age 5. No school, no toys, just a little wooden rake and the hope of someday avoiding the plague. And if you're one of the lucky few who isn't a farmer, maybe you're a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper. Wonderful. You still spend your days working with fire, chemicals, or animal remains in poorly ventilated sheds. The pay? Barely enough to survive. The perks? Occasional bloodshed. Break a bone? Tough luck. Catch a fever? Drink some warm beer and get back to work. There's no time to rest. Not even for a day. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, well, medieval Europe has a solution for that. It's called being replaced. So, you grab your shovel, ignore the blisters, and keep digging. In the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career. It's a long, drawn-out endurance challenge. Now that your back is aching from toiling in the fields, let's discuss the weather. In the Middle Ages, temperature isn't just about seasons. It's a continuous onslaught from the sky. Let's begin with winter. No insulation, no central heating, no weatherproofing, just wooden walls with gaps large enough to throw a chicken through. Your windows are covered with cloth, not glass. The fire in the hearth is pleasant in theory, but you don't have enough firewood to keep it going because wood is expensive, and gathering it from the forest can sometimes get you executed. Yes, you could be put to death for picking the wrong stick from the wrong forest. You bundle yourself in your damp wool tunic, huddle by the fading embers, and still wake up with your nose frozen, your feet perpetually cold, and your fingers stiff, like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite isn't a diagnosis. It's just bad luck. Fast forward to summer. Sounds better, doesn't it? Wrong. In summer, your house becomes a clay oven. No fans, no cross breezes, and absolutely no deodorant. You sweat through your clothes, but you can't take them off because exposing too much skin is scandalous, and also invites sunburn, insect bites, and social disgrace. The flies are out in full force, attracted to your unwashed body and the lingering smell of last week's goat stew that's still fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes buzz by your ears while you sleep, if you can even manage to. Sleep through the noise of your neighbors arguing and babies crying. In the fields, the sun bakes you, no sunscreen, no hat, unless you've fashioned one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. And the worst part? You still have to work. Heat stroke? That's just taking a bad turn. So, you're either shivering in your own hovel, wondering if your toes will make it until spring, or sweating through your only pair of socks while your thighs chafe to oblivion. And the one thing that never changes, no matter the season, your clothes still itch, your food still tastes awful, and your next chore is still waiting. Welcome to climate control, medieval style. There is none. Feeling thirsty? Want to freshen up? Want to splash a little water on your face to wake up from this damp fever dream of life? Too bad. In the Middle Ages, water is your enemy. It's plotting your demise quietly. Let's begin with drinking. The nearby stream looks clear, bubbling and fresh, just like something out of a fairy tale. But spoiler alert, it's not. Upstream, someone just dumped a chamber pot into it, or perhaps a dead pig is decomposing in it. Parasites, bacteria, and the entire microbial army of medieval Europe are waiting in every sip. That's why people drank beer. Yes, beer, even children, but before you picture medieval kids doing keg stands, understand that it was small beer, low in alcohol, but strong in survival. Brewing boiled the water, making it safer than whatever flowed through the town ditch. Wine was another option, if you were wealthy enough to afford it and unconcerned about functioning properly before noon. What about bathing? Surely water was used for cleaning? In theory, yes. In practice, absolutely not. Back then, people believed bathing actually opened your pores and allowed diseases to enter. That's right, washing was considered a health hazard. You were apparently cleaner if you never removed the protective layer of filth covering your skin. Communal baths did exist, but they quickly gained a reputation as places for gossip, scandal, and sometimes full-on medieval extracurricular activities. Naturally, the church stepped in and shut many of them down. Even if you did want to bathe, it was a full production. You'd have to fetch water from the well, boil it over a fire, fill a leaky wooden tub, and then pray no one else in the house used it before or worse, after you, and rainwater collected in open barrels where birds poop, insects breed, and moss grows. Doesn't sound too refreshing, does it? So, whether it's going in your mouth, on your body, or on your crops, water in the Middle Ages is less of a life source and more of a gamble. One wrong gulp, and you'll spend your final days in a straw bed, sweating, clutching your stomach, and regretting every decision that led you here. Next time you take a sip of tap water, raise a glass for our ancestors. They didn't have the luxury of hydration without hazard, so you drank the water, or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like disappointment. Either way, you're sick, you need help, you need a doctor. Too bad you live in the Middle Ages, where medicine is more like polite torture with a theology degree. Let's start with the diagnosis. Everything wrong with you, whether it's a cough, rash, broken bone, or the creeping plague, is because your humors are out of balance. The four humors were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to medieval science, your health depends on keeping these humors balanced, like some sort of internal stew. Got a fever? Too much blood. The solution? Bloodletting. That's right. Let's drain your life force into a bowl using a dull blade or a hungry leech. And yes, barbers were often the ones doing it. Imagine getting a haircut and a bloodletting in one sitting. 2 for 1, baby. Feeling depressed or anxious? That's an excess of black bile. The cure? Laxatives. Maybe a warm herbal purge, or just prayers and a cold compress while everyone avoids eye contact with you and starts preparing your coffin. If you break a bone or get a serious wound, you're in real trouble. There's no anesthesia unless you count passing out from pain. Surgery is done with knives that haven't been cleaned since the Crusades. Tools are heated over fire, not for sterilization, but because it makes them look scarier. Antibiotics? Centuries away. Germ theory? Not even conceived yet. They thought disease came from bad air or God punishing you for your moral failings. Got a stomach ache? It must be your sinful thoughts. Better hope you like confessing while vomiting. If things get worse, you'll be treated with more leeches, possibly crushed beetles, and a priest offering last rites just in case. At this point, they're preparing for the cure known as death. And if, by some miracle, you survive, everyone assumes God took pity on you. The doctor takes full credit, and the leech gets promoted. So yes, in the Middle Ages, medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the cure. After a long day of work, lice and leeches, it's time for your one remaining joy, a warm meal. Bad news. Your food is probably trying to kill you. Let's begin with the basics. Food preservation is almost non-existent. No fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, or the hope that the winter air will keep things fresh. Your meat, if you're lucky enough to have some, has been hanging out for days, covered in flies, marinated in questionable brine, and possibly shared with a rat or two. Bread is the staple of the medieval diet, but even that isn't safe. In bad harvest years, desperate peasants bulk it up with bark, sawdust, or even clay to make it. Stretch, and if it's rye season, there's a bonus. Ergot, a fungus that causes convulsions, hallucinations, and sometimes death. It's like eating bread laced with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables? Only if they're in season. And guess what's always in season? Turnips. So many turnips. Boiled, mashed, or floating in pottage, which, as mentioned earlier, is basically a hot swamp of mystery ingredients that's been simmering since your great-grandfather's funeral. Fruit might be available in the fall, but it rots quickly, and sugar is rare, expensive, and hoarded by the rich to show off their blackened teeth. Dairy is another gamble. Fresh milk spoils in hours, butter and cheese last longer, but they're full of bacteria. People eat them anyway because, honestly, it's either that or chew on your boot. And let's talk about seasoning. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg, worth more than gold for the average peasant. Flavor comes from onions, salt if you're lucky, and pain. Most meals taste like wet burlap sprinkled with sadness. But food isn't just a health hazard. It's also a political one. Game animals belong to the Lord, not you. Get caught poaching a rabbit, you could be fined, imprisoned, or even executed. That's right, your dinner could get you hanged. So, as you sit down to eat your gray stew by flickering firelight, remember, every bite is a risk, but you eat anyway, because in the Middle Ages, food doesn't nourish, it tests you. It's evening now, you've worked, suffered, and barely digested your suspicious stew. You might think the day is winding down, but don't get too comfortable because God is watching. So is the priest, and so is your neighbor, Agnes, who will absolutely rat you out if you miss Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just part of life. It is life. The church controls your calendar, your laws, your education, if you can read, your birth, marriage, death, and everything in between. Think of it as your spiritual landlord, and you're always behind on rent. Every day is structured around prayer bells. The town church bell rings in the morning, noon, and night. Not because people need reminders, but because missing prayer is a sin. Forget to bow. Sin. Eat meat on a Friday? Sin. Think about your neighbor's wife in that one dream? Double sin. And yes, hell is very real, vividly real. Priests describe it in glorious detail. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and eternal wailing. If the plague doesn't scare you, eternal damnation definitely will. You can't read the Bible yourself because it's written in Latin, a language reserved for monks, clergy, and that one noble kid who's too good for dirt. You rely on the church to interpret everything for you. That means, if the priest says your crop failure is because you didn't pray hard enough, well, time to kneel harder. Tithes, a tenth of everything you own, are mandatory. If you grow wheat, you give wheat. If you raise chickens, you give eggs. If you have nothing, congratulations, you're spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. Holidays? They're sacred days, a handful of them, and while they offer a respite from labor, they aren't meant for enjoyment. So, you attend Mass, fast, confess your sins, and remind yourself that joy is a perilous indulgence. Questioning the church? That's a dangerous game. Heretics are burned, witches drowned, blasphemers flogged, and skeptics swiftly reformed. So, you go along with the motions, chanting, bowing, praying for your soul to survive this grim life and reach paradise. Assuming the priest approves of you, in the Middle Ages, God may show mercy, but the church? Not so much. Being a medieval peasant was tough. Being a woman? That's an even more brutal version of the game. Add to the misery of filth, hunger, and fear, the burden of childbirth, submission, and being invisible in society. In the Middle Ages, being a woman means playing on hard mode, no health potions, and no restart button. From the moment you're born, your life's course is set. Marry young, bear children, serve your husband, die exhausted. Education? That's a luxury, if you're from a noble family, and only then if you're sent to a convent. Otherwise, your intellectual growth stalls after learning to churn butter and sew a tunic. Marriage happens early, often before you're even 14. It isn't about love. It's about land, livestock, and strategic alliances. Your opinion doesn't matter. Once married, you belong to your husband, your duties. Bear heirs, feed everyone, keep the house, and never complain. Because complaints might brand you a nag or worse, a witch, and that label can get you a one-way ticket to a fiery death or drowning. Depending on the local trend, childbirth is a deadly gamble. No prenatal care, no sterile tools, no pain relief. Midwives do their best. But even small complications could mean death for mother, child, or both. Some women survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't make it through 2. But once the baby's out, your work only escalates. You now have a crying infant in a lice-infested hut, and you're expected to nurse, cook, clean, and still help in the fields. You never get a break. You are the break for everyone else. If you're unmarried, you're considered suspicious. If you're widowed, you're vulnerable. If you're outspoken, you're dangerous. Women who didn't conform were often labeled as witches, especially if they had herbal knowledge, a bold personality, or even just a funny look on a rainy Tuesday. Even within the church, your role was confined. Nuns lived under strict rules. No speaking without permission, limited movement, and your spiritual worth was always considered inferior to men's. In essence, being a woman in the Middle Ages meant enduring, obeying, procreating, and suffering silently, preferably with a smile. Even in a time of universal suffering, women were expected to suffer graciously. You've already battled filth, hunger, injustice, and maybe even a goat. But just when you think your life can't get worse, here comes violence, loud, bloody, and often socially acceptable. Let's get this straight. The Middle Ages were not peaceful. Law and order mostly meant hoping your local lord was in a good mood. Violence was everywhere, in the home, on the streets, on the battlefield, even in church squabbles. Sometimes it even happened while waiting for bread. Crime was rampant. Punishments were savage. And justice was more of a show than anything else. Steal bread? You might lose a hand. Accused of lying? You might lose your tongue. Talk too much? You could find yourself wearing a scold's bridle, a metal mask with a bar shoved into your mouth for correction. Let's say you're accused of something more serious, heresy, theft, or witchcraft. How do you prove your innocence? By being tortured. Naturally. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One method. Plunge your hand into boiling water to retrieve a stone. If it heals without infection in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, well, you're guilty. Another option. Being tossed into a river. If you sink, you're innocent and probably dead. If you float, you're guilty and will be punished regardless. It's like a medieval game show where survival is the grand prize, and the host is actively rooting for your failure. And if you're sentenced to death, it's a public spectacle. Executions are done in front of cheering crowds, hangings, beheadings, burnings. Sometimes, people even bring snacks. It's the medieval equivalent of TV. Domestic violence was completely normal. Husbands were allowed and even expected to discipline their wives and children. Street fights were common. You could be beaten just for looking at a noble's horse the wrong way. And war? Always on the horizon. Local feuds, territorial battles, religious crusades. Someone's always marching off to fight for honor, God, or sheer boredom. Violence in the Middle Ages wasn't a breakdown of society. It was society itself. Everyone lived knowing that life was fragile. Justice was arbitrary, and your neighbor might just bash your skull in over a pig. So, you learn to walk carefully, keep your eyes down, and never trust anyone wielding a club now that you've survived lice, leeches, endless work, and the constant threat of public disembowelment. It's time for the final chapter of most medieval lives, an early, unremarkable death. If you manage to survive past the age of 40, you're practically a legend. People might even call you the Old One, but not because of wisdom, just because you're a statistical anomaly. Let's break it down. The average life expectancy was around 30 to 40 years, but that number drops significantly due to infant mortality. Half of all children died before the age of 5. Disease, malnutrition, or just one bad winter were enough to end it all. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no hope. If you made it to adulthood, you were already worn out. Work started as soon as you could walk, and by age 25, your body creaked like an ancient church door. You were likely missing teeth, fingers, and your original optimism. Women had it especially hard. Childbirth was one of the top killers. With no pain relief or medical help, just prayer, hot water, and someone holding your hand as you bled to death on a straw mattress. Men had their own dangers, farming accidents, infections from minor wounds, a neighbor's drunken rage, or a crusade gone horribly wrong. Even a simple walk to the market could turn deadly if you crossed paths with a bored bandit or an angry tax collector. Death could come swiftly from plague, famine, or bad luck. Like eating spoiled grain and spending your last hours screaming at the walls. Funerals were rare. Bodies were buried quickly to prevent disease. No embalming. No fancy coffins, just a shallow hole. A few whispered prayers and some dirt, if you were lucky enough to be buried in the churchyard. Yes, in medieval times, life was brutal, short, and constantly threatened by death in all its forms. You didn't retire, you just stopped showing up, and as for exits, let's get to the inevitable end, the death of the medieval dream. So, how was your day? You woke up in filth, relieved yourself in a bucket, brushed your teeth with hope, almost passed out from hunger, worked till your spine begged for mercy, endured the itch of wool, prayed for protection from plague, and narrowly avoided a public execution for owning a squirrel. Welcome to a single day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of being a knight? Think again. That glorified version of the Middle Ages, gallant swordsmen, noble ladies, heroic battles, and feasts in grand halls, is a fantasy fed by fairy tales and novels. The real medieval world was harsh, cruel, and fundamentally unfair. Hierarchy was everything. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born rich, congratulations, you had a better chance of surviving. But even you were just one bad meal away from dysentery and a hasty burial. Even the nobles weren't safe. Castles were cold. Drafty stone fortresses filled with fleas, smoke, and political marriages. Sure, you had a fur cloak and a goblet of wine, but you also had a 50% chance of dying in a skirmish or from an infected splinter. Not exactly luxury. The good old days weren't good at all. They were unrelenting. Everything took longer, hurt more, and came with consequences. Life was about survival, not comfort, and if you ever managed to catch a break and dream of something better, you quickly realized there wasn't much you could do about it. No social mobility, no medicine, no internet to Google your strange rash. You lived, worked, suffered, and died within a few miles of where you were born. But here's the most surprising part. Through all this suffering, people still laughed, sang, told stories, fell in love, and found meaning. Not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn like that. Even in the darkest times, they managed to create a little light. So tonight, as you climb into your comfortable bed with plumbing, antibiotics, and heat, maybe take a moment to thank the modern world and your ancestors who fought rats, famine, and feudalism so you wouldn't have to. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was intended to secure her position in the Russian royal family. But from the start, it felt more like a prison than a palace. Peter, heir to the Russian throne, was far from the charming prince of fairy tales. Awkward, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers. He preferred to immerse himself in war games rather than govern an empire or show affection to his new wife. Some say he refused to consummate the marriage for years. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and held contempt for the Russian court that had taken him in. In contrast, Catherine embraced her new homeland with determination. She learned its language, delved into its history, and mastered Orthodox rituals. While Peter yearned to escape, Catherine was determined to fit in. This disparity wasn't just emotional, it was political. The Russian court was a hotbed of intrigue, gossip, and ruthless power plays. Empress Elizabeth still ruled with absolute power, but her health was deteriorating, and a change was inevitable. Everyone had their own agenda. Catherine was under constant surveillance, her letters read, her friendships scrutinized, and her every movement monitored. She couldn't trust her husband. Her mother, who was still pulling strings on behalf of foreign interests, or even her servants. In such an environment, alliances could easily become accusations. But Catherine wasn't naive. She learned the court's games and quietly built a network of allies. She charmed military officers, befriended scholars, and earned a reputation for grace and composure, an image in sharp contrast to Peter's temper tantrums and disregard for Russian customs. Behind the scenes, Catherine began reading Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. While others saw her as a mere consort, she was formulating a vision for Russia, a nation founded on strength, reason, and education. The problem was that as long as Peter remained alive, Catherine remained trapped as a powerless wife to a man unfit to rule. So, she bided her time, observed, and carefully plotted. She knew the Russian throne wouldn't be handed to her. It had to be seized. In 1762, after nearly 2 decades of patience and subtle maneuvering, Catherine saw her opportunity and took it with extraordinary precision. Empress Elizabeth passed away, and Peter III became Tsar, but his reign quickly unraveled. In a matter of months, Peter alienated the church, enraged the nobility, insulted the army, and showered praise on Prussia, Russia's longtime rival. He reversed key policies, humiliated the clergy, and even spoke openly about divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The court, already distrustful of his erratic behavior, turned against him. The military, filled with generals loyal to Catherine, began to grumble. Even the common people, deeply patriotic and devout, saw Peter as a foreign puppet who mocked their traditions. As this chaos unfolded, Catherine moved swiftly. In July of that same year, while Peter was at his summer palace, Catherine launched a bloodless coup d'état, supported by key military officers, including her lover Gregory Orloff and his influential brothers. She rode through St. Petersburg in full imperial regalia, declared herself Empress Catherine II, and secured the loyalty of the Imperial Guard. Peter, caught by surprise and without any allies, surrendered within days. He was taken into custody and was soon found dead under mysterious circumstances, officially from hemorrhoidal colic. Though unofficially believed to have been murder, Catherine was now empress not by birth nor by marriage, but by sheer determination, intellect, and audacity. It was unprecedented. A foreign-born woman with no legitimate claim had seized the Russian throne without a single battle. But her real challenge lay ahead. Could she transform this bold power grab into a lasting legacy? Would Russia accept her? Would the nobility respect her? Could she maintain the empire without falling victim to the same fate as her husband? Catherine understood that power gained through intrigue could be as easily lost. She had to rule not through manipulation, but as a visionary, and so began her transformation from a careful schemer to a reforming empress, one who would reshape borders, embrace Enlightenment ideals, and redefine the role of a woman in power. Once Catherine ascended the throne, she could have rested on her newfound power, but she had grander ambitions. She sought to transform Russia, not just politically or militarily, but intellectually. While Peter had worshipped Frederick the Great and toy soldiers, Catherine idolized Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire, Diderot, and the progressive intellectuals of the time. She believed in reason, progress, education, and saw her role as a monarch as one who served the people, even though she ruled with absolute authority. Catherine didn't just read Enlightenment philosophy, she embodied it. She corresponded with Voltaire for over 15 years, flattering him while defending her autocracy. She invited Diderot to her court and even purchased his entire library to support him financially. Behind closed doors, she pored over legal texts, debated reforms, and crafted policies to modernize the empire. Her early reign was marked by efforts to codify Russian law. She formed the Legislative Commission in 1767, a bold initiative to rewrite Russia's legal code. Her nakaz, or instruction, was a political manifesto in disguise, calling for equality before the law, the abolition of torture, and the duty of rulers to serve the people. For an empress in 18th century Russia, it was revolutionary. But Enlightenment ideals had to contend with the reality of Russia, a vast, feudal, deeply conservative land ruled by nobles who had a vested interest in keeping their serfs beneath them. Catherine understood this. While she championed reform, she tread carefully. She abolished some forms of torture, expanded secular education, and founded schools and libraries, but she also reinforced the nobility's control over serfs to maintain their loyalty. This was Catherine's delicate balance. Philosopher queen in public, a practical empress in private, she walked a fine line between idealism and survival, between the enlightened salons of Paris and the gritty politics of Moscow. Her vision for Russia was bold, but always calculated. Catherine wasn't just interested in reforming Russia from within. She aimed to expand it outward, making it an empire worthy of admiration, fear, and envy. While Peter the Great had opened a window to the west, Catherine aimed to dismantle the barriers. Under her leadership, Russia's borders expanded further than ever before. She waged wars not merely to defend her throne, but to reshape the European map. One of her most significant campaigns was against the Ottoman Empire. These wars, fought in waves during the 1760s and 1770s, were not merely about territorial conquest. They were about asserting influence. Catherine saw herself as the liberator of Orthodox Christians under Muslim rule and the rightful protector of Eastern Europe. Under generals like Alexander Suvorov and Gregory Pukin, Russia captured crucial territories, including Crimea, the northern Black Sea coast, and access to warm water, ports long coveted by Russian Tsars. These victories were not just military. They were symbolic. With each conquest, Catherine sent a clear message. Russia was no longer Europe's backward cousin. It was a formidable power. She also turned her attention westward, through diplomatic maneuvering and strategic deals. Catherine participated in the partitions of Poland, dividing the weakening Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth with Austria and Prussia. By the final partition in 1795, Poland had disappeared from the map, and Russia had claimed vast new territories and millions of new subjects. But Catherine didn't just conquer with armies. She also colonized with ideas. New cities sprouted, trade routes expanded, and German settlers were invited to develop Russian farmland. The empire became a rich mosaic, from the icy Baltic to the sun-drenched Black Sea. And through it all, Catherine remained the driving force, reading reports, issuing orders, and overseeing her empire's growth. Critics called her power-hungry, even imperialistic. But for Catherine, expansion was not ambition, it was destiny. A great ruler, she believed, wasn't just defined by ideas but by territory. She didn't just want to rule Russia. She wanted to mold it into a civilized empire, feared by its enemies, respected by its peers, and loyal only to her. For all her brilliance and strength, Catherine's reign wasn't free from peril. In 1773, that danger took the form of a bearded Cossack named Yemilian Pugachev. He wasn't just any rebel. Pugachev claimed to be Peter III, Catherine's deceased husband. He said he had survived the coup and now returned to claim the throne. It was preposterous. Peter had long since disappeared. Yet for Russia's downtrodden and weary lower classes, the claim didn't need to be true, only believable enough to inspire hope. Pugachev promised freedom, an end to serfdom, reduced taxes, and land for the common folk. His words sparked a fire throughout the Volga River region, particularly among the Cossack peasants and old believers, in a time when the divide between nobles and serfs had grown unbearably vast. His promises seemed like a lifeline. The Pugachev rebellion became the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Villages were seized, fortresses toppled, and nobles slaughtered. For a chilling moment, it appeared as if the empire itself might fracture. Catherine was rattled. This wasn't a foreign war that could be won with cavalry and diplomacy. This was an insurrection from within, her own subjects rising against the very system she had ruled. But Catherine didn't falter. She responded decisively, sending professional military forces to crush the rebellion with ruthless force. Pugachev's forces were defeated in 1774. He was captured, paraded in an iron cage, and eventually beheaded in Moscow as a stark warning to anyone daring to follow in his footsteps. In the aftermath, Catherine doubled down on control and stability. Her hopes of liberating the serfs quietly vanished. The rebellion had shown her the limits of enlightenment in a nation still shackled by feudalism. She turned her focus toward the nobility, who, in exchange for their loyalty, were granted absolute dominion over their serfs. This marked a significant turning point. The empress who once quoted Voltaire now prioritized order over idealism. Reforms became more cautious, and surveillance tightened. Even the whisper of rebellion was met with swift and brutal action. Pugachev may have lost his head, but he left behind a haunting reminder for Catherine. Power built on inequality could only remain intact for so long before the storm of discontent broke through. By the time Catherine the Great neared the end of her reign, she had ruled Russia for over 3 decades, longer than any woman before her in Russian history. From the moment she seized the throne, she defied expectations, reshaped her empire, and redefined what it meant to be both a woman and a monarch. Under Catherine's rule, Russia emerged as a formidable European power. The empire expanded by more than 200,000 square miles, absorbing Crimea, parts of Poland, and much of the Black Sea coastline. These territorial gains weren't mere military victories. They were strategic maneuvers that secured critical warm-water ports and transformed trade. Yet Catherine's legacy wasn't just defined by land. She also played a pivotal role in the cultural development of Russia. She helped establish the Hermitage Museum, acquired one of Europe's most impressive art collections, and maintained correspondence with the leading minds of the Enlightenment. Her court became a hub of sophistication, art, and intellectual ambition, placing Russia on the cultural map of Europe, an empire once considered backward by the West. She modernized education, founding schools for girls and promoting the printing of books. Catherine also introduced smallpox inoculation to Russia, even going as far as receiving the vaccine herself in a public demonstration of scientific courage. However, her reign was filled with contradictions. While she admired Enlightenment ideals, she never emancipated the serfs. In fact, she deepened serfdom's grip on Russia's territories. Her reforms, though significant, remained top-down, polishing the empire without truly changing its feudal foundation. Despite these contradictions, Catherine's rule brought stability and forward momentum. She understood that power wasn't inherited, it had to be crafted, carefully managed, and constantly defended. She didn't rule by divine right, but by political acumen, intellectual brilliance, and relentless calculation. She was labeled in many ways: a usurper, a tyrant, a reformer, and a seductress, but above all, she was effective. Upon her death in 1796, Russia was wealthier, larger, and stronger than it had been in centuries. She left behind a secure throne, a vast empire, and a legacy that would endure for generations. Catherine didn't simply sit on the throne. She redefined what it meant to deserve it. For all her power, expansion, and lasting influence, Catherine the Great remained, at her core, a woman in a man's world, reshaping that world to her own vision. Behind the imperial portraits and royal decrees, there was a woman acutely aware of her precarious position. She wasn't born Russian. She ascended to the throne through a coup. She ruled an empire that wasn't eager to see a woman in charge. Yet, she didn't just survive, she thrived. Catherine was never content with being a figurehead. She read voraciously, wrote tirelessly, and never stopped learning. Her daily routine was demanding: reviewing reports, corresponding with foreign governments, editing state papers, and managing a court of rivals. She never saw her reign as passive. She worked at it with the intensity of a stateswoman born for leadership. Loneliness also marked her life, though she surrounded herself with courtiers, lovers, and artists. Her memoirs reveal that few could be trusted. Her son, Paul, whom she distanced from state affairs, grew into a man she feared would undo all her work. Her greatest emotional connection, with Gregory Potemkin, turned into a deep friendship, but his death in 1791 left a wound that never fully healed. Catherine carefully curated her image. She was the mother of Russia, the enlightened monarch, the warrior empress, and the patron of the arts. Yet beneath those roles lay a woman who endured rejection, betrayal, scandal, and insurrection, and kept moving forward. When Catherine died in 1796, she left behind a transformed empire, but also lingering questions. Could she have done more to end serfdom? Were her Enlightenment principles compromised by the realities of politics? Was she more a reformer or a ruler? History remembers her as the Great, a title she never claimed, not because she was flawless or fair, but because she seized power and wielded it in an age and place where women were expected to have none. She didn't merely wear the crown. She reshaped what it meant to deserve one. In the humid depths of southern Mexico's Chiapas jungle, the ruins of Palenque whisper ancient Maya secrets. Towering temples rise above the canopy, their limestone faces weathered by time, yet still rich with mystery. In 1994, one such mystery emerged. A team of Mexican archaeologists, led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez, was surveying Temple 3, a modest pyramid next to the Grand Temple of the Inscriptions, the final resting place of King Pacal the Great. Temple 3 was not expected to yield much until they noticed something unusual. A hidden chamber beneath it, untouched by looters, perfectly sealed. When the archaeologists broke through and descended inside, they discovered a stone sarcophagus lying in eerie silence. The air was thick with the weight of centuries. As the lid was opened, a red dust swirled into the air, brilliant, shocking crimson. The interior was coated in powdered cinnabar, a toxic mercury sulfide used in Maya ceremonies, and within that scarlet cloud lay the skeletal remains of a woman. She had been laid to rest with reverence, her fragile bones intact, her skull adorned with a jade mask, and her body surrounded by burial offerings, necklaces, diadems, and ear spools crafted from jade and shell. The burial spoke of royalty, but her identity remained a mystery. No name was inscribed. No glyphs revealed her status. It was one of the richest female burials ever discovered in Mesoamerica. Yet her story remains an enigma. Why was she buried in red powder? Who was she? Was she a queen, a priestess, or perhaps Pacal's wife? The archaeologists dubbed her the Red Queen, a name that has since become iconic. Yet, even with modern forensic techniques, her identity remains uncertain. All that can be said is that she lived around the 7th century, during the height of Palenque's golden age. Unlike most Maya tombs, hers was deliberately hidden and sealed off. Her burial wasn't just ceremonial, it was spiritual. She was meant to be remembered not through words, but through ritual, through color, and through the mystery she left behind. The most striking feature of the Red Queen's tomb wasn't her jade jewelry or the stillness of the sealed chamber. It was the red dust. A thick layer of cinnabar coated everything: the sarcophagus, the walls, her bones, and even the offerings surrounding her. It clung to stone like blood. To the Maya, this wasn't by chance. Cinnabar was one of the most sacred and dangerous substances known to them. Its vibrant red color symbolized blood, rebirth, and the connection between the human and divine worlds. Red wasn't just a color. It was a spiritual force, representing life emerging from death. Bathing the corpse in cinnabar wasn't about preserving the body. It was about preparing the soul for transition. To the Maya, death was a crossing into another realm. Not the end, but a transformation. The Red Queen, whoever she was, wasn't just buried. She was prepared for deification. But there's another layer. Cinnabar is toxic. Repeated exposure causes mercury poisoning, tremors, hallucinations, and even death. While the Maya might not have understood the chemical dangers, they sensed its potency. To cover the dead in cinnabar was to declare them extraordinary, beyond mortal limits. Only a few were buried with cinnabar in Palenque, Pacal the Great. For one, his body, like hers, was saturated in the red powder. This similarity sparked speculation. Could the Red Queen have been Pacal's wife, mother, or a figure of equal divine significance? Her skull rested on a layer of jaguar skin, another sacred symbol, Around her were bone needles, obsidian blades, and jade figurines, items used in rituals during her life or in honor of her death. Every aspect of her burial told a story, without words, a tale of power, ritual, and secrecy. The Red Queen was not just a woman. She was a figure prepared to cross into the afterlife, not in silence, but in ceremony, immersed in the color of sacrifice. Her tomb, adorned with jade, shell, and obsidian, was filled with offerings meant to guide her on her journey to the Maya afterlife Zabalba. Each jade necklace, polished and cold, symbolized eternal life. Jade represented the vitality of the jungle, the green of maize, and the breath of the gods. Only the elite were buried with jade, marking the Red Queen as someone of great power and influence in life, perhaps even with divine favor. The most haunting item was the jade burial mask, placed gently over her face. Unlike the golden death masks of Egypt, hers was subtle, constructed from mosaic tiles that followed the contours of her skull. The mask had a sacred role, meant to shield the soul, preserve identity, and present her as a divine figure before the gods. Among the scattered relics surrounding her remains were bone needles, obsidian blades, and shell objects. These might have been ritual tools or symbols of her standing as a priestess, healer, or royal matriarch. One bone pin, though faintly etched, displayed a deliberate design, a soft echo of her voice lost through time. Near her feet and along the edges of the tomb lay sealed ceramic vessels, likely once filled with offerings, food, drink, or incense, intended to nourish her spirit in the afterlife. The Maya viewed the afterlife as a perilous, multi-layered journey full of trials. These items weren't luxuries but essentials. In a more modern perspective, the tomb feels intimate, deliberate rather than excessive. There was no gold, no chariots, no grandiose display, only items with spiritual significance. This tomb was a roadmap for the soul. Through these objects, we gain insight into how the Maya saw death, not as an end, but as a transformation of power. The Red Queen wasn't meant to be forgotten. She was being prepared for her ascension. Despite the grandeur of her burial, the Red Queen leaves behind one chilling void: her name. No inscriptions marked her sarcophagus. No glyphs on the walls identified her. Clearly a woman of importance, but who exactly? From the moment her tomb was unearthed, scholars have speculated about her identity. The most compelling theory is that the Red Queen was Zakbu Aha, the wife of Kinich Jenab Pakal, or Pakal the Great, the most renowned ruler of Palenque. Zakbu Aha was far more than just Pakal's wife. She came from a noble family and married into Palenque's royal lineage at a young age. She gave birth to at least 3 sons, all of whom held prominent positions and played a crucial ceremonial role during her husband's reign. If anyone deserved such an honorable burial, it was her. This theory is supported by the tomb's location, just a short distance from Pakal's own lavish burial in the Temple of the Inscriptions. The close proximity suggests a deliberate pairing, husband and wife rulers, even in death. The cinnabar used in both burials is also a significant clue. Only 2 tombs in Palenque were found with such heavy cinnabar coating: Pakal's and the Red Queen's. This is too precise to be mere coincidence. However, the mystery only deepens here. DNA tests were performed on both sets of remains, attempting to confirm the relationship, but the results were inconclusive. The woman's bones showed no direct maternal connection to Pakal, but this does not rule out a spousal link. After all, marriage doesn't require shared bloodlines. Some have suggested she could have been Sukuk, Pakal's powerful mother who ruled Palenque before his ascendancy. Others speculate she might have been a high priestess, sister, or even a royal ancestor whose name was lost to time. However, The evidence leans most convincingly toward Zakbu-Aha, a queen in title, mother to kings, and spiritual counterpart to Pakal. The absence of her name may not have been an oversight. It could have been purposeful. In Maya thought, the soul lived on not through monuments but through rituals, symbols, and the earth's whispers, and so, the Red Queen exists in that liminal space between myth and reality, a woman of power, whose legacy is not etched in stone but woven into silence and scarlet. To understand the Red Queen, we must first comprehend the world from which she came, a world where Maya women, especially those of royal descent, wielded more influence than many realize. In Maya society, politics was often a family affair. Royal women were not mere passive consorts. They were diplomats, priestesses, and power brokers. They conducted rituals, sponsored temples, and played pivotal roles in securing dynastic legitimacy. Their bloodlines were political assets, used to form alliances and solidify claims to the throne. Take Sekuk, for example, Pakal the Great's mother. When the throne of Palenque became vacant, she assumed power herself and ruled as queen regent until her son was of age. She was no mere placeholder. She was a ruler in her own right, issuing decrees and overseeing construction projects. Without her, Palenque may not have reached its height, and she was not alone. Across the Maya world, in cities like Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul, inscriptions reveal women performing significant ceremonies, engaging in warfare and diplomacy, and at times, ruling outright. They were often depicted in stele and murals, adorned in elaborate headdresses and regalia, standing alongside kings as equals or, on occasion, above them. Their words were immortalized in glyphs. Their names were remembered until they were forgotten. By the time Spanish conquistadors arrived, much of this history had been lost. The colonial perspective saw native women as silent figures in a male-dominated society. But the archaeology tells a different story, one of complex gender dynamics, where power was negotiated rather than inherited. This lens reshapes how we view the Red Queen. She may not have ruled in name, but her burial, opulent, sacred, and beside Pakal, suggests she was central to the royal order. Her jade mask wasn't just decoration. It was a symbol of her identity, power, and her protection in the afterlife. Her bloodline may have been the very foundation that held Palenque's dynasty together. In Maya civilization, a queen was never just a queen. She was a guardian of sacred heritage, a voice in sacred ceremonies, and often the intermediary between gods and humans. The Red Queen may not have had a name, but she was never voiceless. The Red Queen's burial wasn't just rich in treasures but in architecture steeped in purpose, laden with Maya cosmology, and designed with ritual intent. Her tomb wasn't simply a burial, it was a passage to eternity. Her remains were discovered within Temple 3, one of the smaller pyramids in Palenque's core, yet its proximity to the Temple of the Inscriptions, where Pakal the Great was laid to rest, is significant. These temples were strategically positioned, not randomly constructed. Their alignment was rooted in sacred principles, guided by astrology, myth, and the royal legacy. Temple 3, modest in height compared to its grand neighbor, conceals something far more personal, a sealed crypt, untouched by looters, perfectly preserved. Deep within the temple, the tomb could only be accessed by a steep, narrow staircase. The descent into her tomb feels almost symbolic, a journey into the underworld. Inside, the chamber is stark, constructed of cut stone, sealed for over 130 years. There are no glyphs or murals, no elaborate carvings to tell her story. Yet this silence may be intentional. This wasn't a space for the living to interpret, but for the dead to undergo transformation. In the center lies her sarcophagus, like an altar made of limestone. It mirrors the grand stone coffin of Pakal, but while his is adorned with scenes of cosmic rebirth, the Red Queen's tomb focuses inward, on the body, the cinnabar, the ritual of death itself. Still, subtle architectural hints provide deeper meaning. The tomb faces east to west, echoing the sun's journey from life to death. Though small, the chamber feels deliberate, personal, sacred, a space for one revered. Maya temples were tools of the cosmos, bridges between the heavens, earth, and underworld. To be buried in one was to be elevated beyond the mortal realm. The Red Queen's eternal resting place wasn't a mere afterthought. It was a sacred shrine, where death became transformation. Her bones rest in stone, her spirit in cinnabar, her legacy etched into the very architecture. A temple that speaks volumes, reminding us she was truly important. To the ancient Maya, death was not an end, it was a threshold, a sacred transition into the underworld, known as Xibalba. For someone like the Red Queen, this crossing was spiritual, political, and deeply ritualized. Maya texts and iconography describe Xibalba as no peaceful afterlife. It was a labyrinth of darkness, rivers of blood, and trials before gods of death. Only those who were properly buried and spiritually prepared could navigate this journey successfully. The Red Queen's burial, surrounded by bone needles and obsidian blades, points to possible auto-sacrifice rituals, tools symbolizing rites she may have performed during life or reenacted at her burial to empower her spirit. Her jade mask, carefully crafted from jade tiles, was not merely decorative. It likely served as a spiritual vessel, preserving her face and identity as she journeyed into the afterlife. In Maya belief, the face mirrored the soul, and the gods needed to recognize it. Ceramic vessels surrounding her might have contained chocolate, maize, water, or pulque to sustain her in the next world. Other items, such as stingray spines or shell trumpets, may have symbolized spiritual tools, calls to the gods, or ritual communication. Burial was not a final farewell. It was a transformation. The Maya saw death as a seed, burial as planting, and the afterlife as rebirth. Kings and queens were often viewed as earthly gods, and in death, they returned to their divine origins. The Red Queen, swathed in blood-red cinnabar, laid to rest in a pyramid, and honored with offerings, was prepared for her rebirth, not as a mortal, but as a divine figure tied to the sacred order of the cosmos. Her burial marked not the end, but the start of her legend. Just steps away from her final resting place lies the iconic tomb of Pakal the Great, whose resting place in the Grand Temple of the Inscriptions is renowned for its grandeur and spiritual symbolism. What sets the Red Queen's tomb apart isn't just what was inside, but where it was found. Her sarcophagus, hidden within Temple 3, was positioned directly next to Pakal's monumental tomb. In Palenque, where every temple was positioned to reflect cosmic principles, this close placement was no accident. It was purposeful, a statement carved in stone. Many scholars suggest the Red Queen was Zakbu Aha, Pakal's queen and trusted partner. While her tomb lacks inscriptions, the similarities between their burials are undeniable. Both were wrapped in cinnabar, entombed in pyramids, honored with jade, and treated with profound reverence. Their burial rituals mirror one another, as if two halves of a sacred story. Pakal's tomb lid depicts him descending into the underworld tree, an image of death and rebirth. The Red Queen's simpler tomb contains no such imagery, yet the symbolism lies in the pairing itself. If Pakal represented the sun, journeying through the underworld to rise again, the Red Queen may have symbolized the moon, embodying the feminine force that follows its own enigmatic path across the sky. Together with her counterpart, They personified a cosmic duality, the masculine and feminine, the king and queen, the sun and moon, order and ritual. In Maya culture, power was never singular. It was relational. Harmony within the universe required balance, and this equilibrium extended into the royal court. By positioning the Red Queen alongside Palenque, the Maya were safeguarding not only a marital bond but a cosmic partnership. Their closeness in death may have reflected their life roles. A queen not behind her king, but by his side, sharing not just a throne but a legacy. In their burial chambers, they communicate without words, two souls enveloped in cinnabar and stone, united across eternity, one of history's most profound silences. While her name was lost to time, the Red Queen of Palenque endures, not as an ancient relic, but as one of the most fascinating and powerful women of the ancient world. Her tomb, sealed for over 300 years, now speaks across centuries, sparking questions that grow louder with every revelation. She represents a mystery that continues to defy full understanding. We may never truly know who she was. No glyph recorded her name. No monument chronicled her tale. Yet, the care in her interment, the opulence of her offerings, and the symbolism of her crimson-soaked remains all speak of a woman of profound importance. Someone with not just a role as a wife or consort, but one who wielded true power, spiritual influence, and royal heritage. Today, the Red Queen compels us to rethink our assumptions. She stands as a reminder that in the ancient Maya world, women were not passive. They led ceremonies, ruled cities, and shaped dynasties. While kings like Palenque have long dominated the narrative, the resurgence of the Red Queen tells us that power was not exclusively male. It flowed through mothers, queens, priestesses, and visionaries. Her legacy is more than the treasures she left behind. It's the conversation she's ignited among archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers. Every jade bead, each cinnabar layer, every deliberate architectural choice in the temple speaks volumes. This woman mattered, and perhaps the most remarkable aspect of her story is not what we know, but what remains a mystery. The Red Queen teaches us that history is not a mere collection of facts. It's a living puzzle, a collective human yearning to connect with the past. In that way, her legacy continues to unfold. She lies encased in red, the color of life, sacrifice, blood, and renewal. Her face, once veiled behind a jade mask, now gazes at us through science, art, and awe. She is nameless but not voiceless, shrouded in mystery but not forgotten. While the Red Queen may have ruled a kingdom in life, in death, she reigns over something greater, our imagination. Her tomb was sealed in stone, her story etched in silence, and yet, she still speaks. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in the vibrant district of Coyoacán, which was then a village on the outskirts of Mexico City. Her childhood home, the Casa Azul Blue House, was full of color, contradictions, and quiet strength. This house would later become not just a sanctuary, but a battleground and a museum dedicated to one of the most iconic artists of the 20th century. Frida was the third of 4 daughters born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilda Calderon, a devout Catholic of indigenous and Spanish heritage. Her parents were opposites. Guillermo was reserved and intellectual, while Matilda was emotionally distant and religious. From her father, Frida inherited introspection and an artistic eye, and from her mother, a fierce resilience. As a child, Frida was imaginative, outspoken, and daring. She was a voracious reader and asked questions that most adults found uncomfortable to answer. But at the age of 6, she contracted polio, which left her right leg thinner and weaker than the left. It was a difference she tried to hide with long skirts, but it never subdued her spirit. The illness left her bedridden for months and isolated from other children. During this time, she grew close to her father, who encouraged her to exercise, ride bicycles, and stay mentally sharp. Unlike most girls of her time, Frida didn't dream of becoming a wife or homemaker. Instead, she aimed to become a doctor. At 15, she enrolled at the prestigious National Preparatory School in Mexico City, one of the few girls accepted there. She stood out not only for her intellect, but also for her rebellious wit, radical ideas, and distinctive fashion sense. She joined a group of young intellectuals known as the Cachuchas, who debated philosophy, literature, and politics. Frida was drawn to revolution, to ideas that challenged tradition. But even before the bus crash that would alter her body and the fame that would mark her legacy, Frida Kahlo was already beginning to paint her own world with sharp edges, bold ideas, and a sense of identity too large to fit into anyone else's expectations. She wasn't just growing up in Coyoacán. She was preparing to reinvent herself entirely. On September 17, 1925, Frida Kahlo's life was split in two: the girl she had been and the woman she had to become. That afternoon, she boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arambola. After school, they were laughing, teasing, and probably bickering. Frida never did anything halfway. Moments later, the bus collided with a streetcar, and in an instant, her future was shattered into pain, metal, and silence. The crash was catastrophic. The streetcar pinned the bus against a wall, splintering wood and tossing passengers. Frida was impaled by an iron handrail that pierced her left hip and exited through her pelvis. Her spinal column fractured in 3 places, her right leg shattered, her foot dislocated, her collarbone and ribs broken, her shoulder dislocated, and her abdomen punctured. She was just 18 years old. A man covered her with a borrowed overcoat, and someone noticed that her body glimmered, not from blood, but from gold powder she had been carrying in a pouch. The impact had exploded it, dusting her broken body in glittering ashes. Frida was rushed to the Red Cross hospital and underwent numerous surgeries over the next several months. She spent weeks in a body cast, unable to move, struggling with infection and uncertainty. The future she had envisioned, becoming a doctor, slipped further away with every passing day. Yet, in that stillness, something began to shift. Her father gave her brushes. Her mother fashioned a special easel to hang above her bed. A mirror was placed on the canopy so she could see herself. And there, lying in pain and plaster, Frida began to paint. Initially, it was out of boredom, but soon it became an obsession. Her first subjects were her own reflection, because she had nothing else to paint. But what emerged wasn't vanity, it was survival. The crash had broken her physically, but it had also opened a door to her own mind, body, and eventually to the surreal language of pain and identity that would define her art. The girl who had wanted to heal others now began to heal herself, one brushstroke at a time. As Frida lay immobilized in plaster and steel, a body in constant struggle, she began to paint. What started as therapy soon evolved into a language, one deeply personal, brutally honest, and often difficult to look at. But that was precisely the point. Frida didn't paint pretty flowers or tame landscapes. She painted pain, her pain, physical, emotional, and existential. Her early works were self-portraits, not out of vanity, but because, as she famously said, "I paint myself because I am often alone, and I am the subject I know best." These early paintings were small, often on tin or wood panels, inspired by Mexican retablos, devotional paintings meant to tell stories of suffering and miracles. Frida turned this tradition inward. Her body became the canvas. Her emotions became the altar. She painted herself as torn, pierced, and bleeding. In one work, she is impaled by nails, like a modern martyr. In another, she floats in a barren landscape, tethered to a broken column, symbolizing her shattered spine. She painted herself weeping, fractured, decapitated, and exposed, but never passive, always observant. Her pain was raw and unflinching. She painted the harsh reality of trauma with beauty, defiance, and even humor. Each painting was a reclamation of her body, her experience, and her identity as a woman in a world that often tried to define her. But Frida wasn't just telling her own story. She was creating a new visual language, one that blended Mexican folk art, surrealism, medical illustration, and symbolism. Her paintings became dreamlike autopsies of her soul, framed in color, culture, and myth. By the time she was well enough to walk again, albeit painfully, Frida was no longer the girl who had dreamed of becoming a doctor. She was an artist, and her art was unlike anything anyone had seen before. She had taken the most tragic event of her life and transformed it into a wellspring of creativity. Frida Kahlo didn't just paint her pain. She made the world look at it, and by doing so, she turned suffering into an act of sacred self-expression. In 1928, still recovering, still painting, and only 21 years old, Frida met the man who would become the most profound and tumultuous relationship of her life, Diego Rivera. He was 20 years older, already a famous artist in Mexico, and a towering figure in Mexican muralism. Rivera's politically charged murals, filled with sweeping depictions of the Mexican people, had already captured Frida's admiration. Now, she sought his opinion on her own work. She presented her paintings to him at the Ministry of Education, interrupting his work on a scaffold to ask bluntly, "Do I have talent?" Diego took one look and replied, "Yes, and not just out of kindness." He recognized in her something extraordinary, an unfiltered voice, raw and unapologetic, full of pain, irony, and beauty. Their relationship was as consuming as it was creative. Frida once said, "I suffered 2 accidents in my life, one in which a streetcar knocked me down, and the other was Diego." They married in 1929, an unlikely pairing by outsider standards. Diego, large, unfaithful, and politically famous. Frida, sharp-tongued, fiercely independent, and already walking with a cane. Her parents described their marriage as a union between an elephant and a dove. Their bond was passionate but tumultuous. Diego supported her art and encouraged her growth as a painter, but he was also endlessly unfaithful. Even with Frida's sister, Cristina, Frida, in turn, took lovers of her own, both men and women, including rumored affairs with Leon Trotsky and artist Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, only to remarry a year later with different terms. This time, Frida would retain her autonomy, her home, her finances, her name. Their second marriage was less about traditional love and more about creative collaboration and mutual understanding. Despite the pain and betrayal, Diego remained a constant presence in Frida's life. He challenged her, wounded her, but also believed in her as an artist, a revolutionary, and a woman capable of transforming the world of art. Together, they were not a tranquil pair, but they became legendary. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York as he worked on prestigious mural projects. These years abroad exposed her to the industrial power, wealth, and the contradictions inherent in capitalism. They stirred a deep political discomfort within her. Frida was a staunch Mexican nationalist, a committed communist, and an admirer of indigenous cultures. The extravagant wealth she encountered in the United States, especially during the Great Depression, only deepened her sense of disillusionment. In her letters, she mocked the culture's obsession with materialism and superficiality. She yearned for the grit, vibrancy, and contradictions of Mexico, while Diego created grand murals on factory walls. Frida focused on smaller, more intimate revolutions, paintings on tin and canvas that revealed her deeply personal vision. Her style grew distinct, sharp, surreal, emotional, and introspective. It was during this period that she created some of her most iconic self-portraits. Frida didn't paint herself out of vanity. She painted to survive. Her identity became her canvas. Battling constant pain from her accident, multiple surgeries, and a miscarriage in Detroit, she turned inward. Her portraits often depicted her as fragmented, bleeding, and exposed. Yet her face remained calm, direct, and unapologetic. One of her most striking works, Henry Ford Hospital, shows her lying in a hospital bed, crying, surrounded by symbols of loss, a fetus, a snail, medical instruments, and a fractured pelvis. It was raw, unsettling, and deeply emotional. A canvas that bled with truth. Back in Mexico, Frida fully immersed herself in leftist politics. She and Diego welcomed Leon Trotsky into their home during his exile. Frida proudly wore Tijuana dresses, traditional indigenous garments, not just as fashion but as a statement of her cultural and political beliefs. Her art was inseparable from her values, her body, her identity, and her ideology intertwined seamlessly in her work. While Rivera painted murals celebrating revolution, Frida painted its human toll, the broken body, the tormented mind, and the ever-present self. In illness and exile, she became not just a painter of pain but a painter of resistance. When Frida returned to Mexico in the late 1930s, she was no longer just Diego Rivera's wife. She had transformed into something entirely new, a force of nature, an artist whose work radiated raw honesty, surreal symbolism, and a powerful sense of cultural identity. She had fully embraced herself. Her Casa Azul in Coyoacán became a sanctuary of color and contradiction. Cobalt blue walls, yellow trim, Aztec statues in the garden, and monkeys and parrots roaming freely. The house was an extension of Frida's vivid imagination, a fusion of tradition and rebellion, elegance and earthiness. Here, she surrounded herself with pre-Columbian artifacts, ex-votos, folk art, and revolutionary literature. She wore vibrant Tijuana dresses, wove flowers into her hair, and painted surrounded by the scent of copal incense and the sound of mariachi music from the streets outside. This period marked a burst of creative energy. Her works became more intricate, symbolic, and politically charged. Paintings like the two Fridas revealed a divided self, one wearing European attire with a bleeding heart, the other in indigenous clothing, strong and composed. It was Frida's visual autobiography, a portrayal of love, loss, and heritage. In 1939, Frida exhibited her works in Paris, where artists like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky lauded her fiercely unique style. But even among the surrealists, Frida stood apart. When André Breton tried to classify her as one of them, she rejected the label. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said. "But I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." She painted Mexico, not the idealized, tourist version, but the living, breathing country she loved. Her work was filled with symbols, skeletons, hummingbirds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood. She celebrated her homeland's indigenous roots while confronting the violence of its past and present. Despite the growth of her artistic voice, her health continued to deteriorate. Multiple surgeries, infections, and constant pain became her daily reality. Yet, she painted on, propped up in bed, her torso bound in corsets, her fingers gripping the brush. Frida returned to Mexico, not to rest but to reclaim her strength through art, politics, and her fearless acceptance of herself. As the 1940s passed, her body continued to betray her spine deteriorated, and her right leg remained infected. She underwent more than 30 surgeries throughout her life, often enduring them one after another. At times, she was bedridden for months, immobilized by body casts or devices that stretched her bones apart. But she still painted. Each painting from these years became both a release and an act of defiance. Her works grew darker, bolder. She painted with an honesty honed by pain, refusing to hide behind allegory. In The Broken Column, she depicted herself torn down the middle, her body pierced by nails, a broken ionic column standing in for her spine. Yet her expression remained stoic, her gaze unwavering. Pain, for Frida, was not just a subject, it was her constant companion, her antagonist, her muse. Her political activism also intensified. She joined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in protests, wrote impassioned letters, and condemned imperialism and injustice. When her health prevented her from walking, she attended rallies in a wheelchair, holding signs and shouting slogans. In 1953, Frida was given her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a long-awaited recognition of her art. But her health was so fragile that doctors advised against her attendance. So, in true Frida fashion, she arrived by ambulance, carried in on a stretcher, and placed in the center of the gallery on her hospital bed. Dressed in traditional attire and surrounded by her work, she greeted visitors with tequila, laughter, and the same fiery spirit that had never left her. Her final paintings were both haunting and whimsical. In Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick, she painted herself in a steel corset, embraced by the hands of Marx, casting off symbols of oppression. Her last known piece was a still life of watermelons, one slice emblazoned with the words "Viva la vida," long live life. Even in the face of death, she remained defiant, joyful, and politically charged. Frida Kahlo's final self-portraits were more than just representations of herself. They were revolutionary acts, painted through pain, but always signed with life. On July 13, 1954, at the age of 47, Frida Kahlo passed away in the same place she had been born, La Casa Azul in Coyoacán. The official cause was listed as a pulmonary embolism, but those closest to her whispered that her exhaustion from the battle with her body played a deeper role. Just days before, she had attended a protest against the CIA coup in Guatemala. Despite her frail health and reliance on a wheelchair, she insisted on attending, her clenched fist raised in defiance. Revolution remained her final heartbeat. Her final diary entry was brief but profound. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Frida's funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Arts, Mexico's most prestigious cultural institution. Her body, draped in the red flag of the Mexican Communist Party, was surrounded by friends, family, artists, and revolutionaries. Diego Rivera was inconsolable. He declared her to be the greatest love of his life, despite his betrayals that had almost destroyed her. But in the years following her death, something extraordinary occurred. Frida Kahlo refused to fade into history. Initially, her name was spoken only in art circles. Her works defied easy categorization, too political for surrealists, too surreal for conventionalists. Yet slowly, her image, her story, and her defiance began to resonate worldwide. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, as feminist scholars and activists reclaimed overlooked voices, Frida's grew louder. She was no longer just a painter. She became a symbol of pain transformed into beauty, feminism born from resistance, and a proud Mexican identity unashamed of its roots. Her face, unibrow, piercing gaze, flowers in her hair became iconic. Her home became a museum, her diary a sacred text, and her paintings now grace the world's most prestigious galleries. Her face, unibrow, piercing gaze, flowers in her hair became iconic. Her home became a museum, her diary a sacred text, and her paintings now grace the world's most prestigious galleries. Today, Frida's face is everywhere, on t-shirts, murals, dolls, memes, and posters. Her signature unibrow, flower-laden hair, and unapologetic gaze are instantly recognizable. What makes her legacy powerful, however, is not just the recognition of her face. It's the truth behind it. Frida never sought perfection. She didn't fit into predefined boxes. She was unconventional, and she embraced it. In a world that demands flawlessness, she gave us authenticity, raw, messy, vibrant, angry, joyful, and contradictory. She celebrated what made her different, her disability, her queerness, her politics, her culture, and transformed it into art that transcends time and borders. She's more than an artist. She's a global icon of resistance, feminism, cultural pride, and creative defiance. For queer communities, she is a bold bisexual icon who lived openly and unapologetically in a time of silence. For women, she is a reminder that power doesn't require permission. For disabled artists, she is proof that pain can propel the brush, not hinder it. And for Mexico, she is a daughter fiercely reclaimed, folk-inspired, and forever etched in the nation's soul. Her paintings, once dismissed as too personal or too strange, are now among the most revered in the world. Pieces like the two Fridas, self-portrait with thorn necklace and hummingbird, and the broken column are no longer just viewed. They are felt by anyone who has ever suffered and turned that suffering into something sacred. She lived in the margins and brought them to the forefront. She embraced contradictions, a communist with a love for gold, a woman betrayed who loved again, a body in pieces with a soul unyielding. Through it all, she painted not just with colors but with purpose. Frida Kahlo never asked to be a symbol. She simply revealed her truth, and in doing so, gave voice to countless others who had never seen their own reflections in art before. Now, when we see her face, we see courage, we see color, we see resistance. We see Frida, not gone, but immortal,